Yanam, car. Yanena, by car. Vimanam, plane. Vimanena, by plane. Relayanam, train. Relayanena, by train. Lokayanam, bus. Lokayanena, by bus. Dvichakrika, bicycle. Dvichakrikaya, by bicycle. Trichakrika, rickshaw. Trichakrikaya, by rickshaw. Irya Chakrika, motorbike. Irya Chakrikaya, by motorbike. Padabhyam, on foot.
Chapter 19. So this is the first chapter of volume 2. We will learn chapter 2, verse 45. Introduction to meter. Nominal ending in mat. So when it says nominals, all it means is nouns. So in other words, noun plus mat or vat. Okay, so in other words, what is this now? If it comes after the noun, it's called a suffix. If it comes before the noun, it's called a prefix. Therefore, we're going to learn about suffixes. And what are these suffixes? Mat, vat. They can interchange them. You're going to say, how do you know whether to use mat or vat? There's a little of a row there. You will see. However, they are together. Consider them one. So therefore, mat and vat are considered one suffix. Ya is a different suffix, and toi is another different suffix. All these suffixes mean possessing that. So whatever the noun is, for example, say sukha, remember you just put the stem, vat, what do you think sukha vat means?
Possessing happiness.
Possessing happiness, in other words. Excellent. Jnana vat. What could this mean?
Knowledge.
Possessing knowledge. Excellent. In other words, now the question is, you go one step further. What is that which possesses knowledge? A wise person. Therefore, jnana vat, wise person. So the formula is, you then ask, after this one possesses, what could that be? What could that mean? It could mean a wise person. Okay, imperative. When you think of imperative, this is a new case in the present tense. What does imperative sound like? It sounds like emperor. What does an emperor do? He issues commands. Do this. In other words, go. Rama, go to the forest. In other words, I'm telling you a command. And upapada compound, in summary, will be the following. Member 1 plus root. And then you end it with either nara, pala, or sena. So member 1 obviously is stem, right? Stem of any word. And then you just put a root, and then you just end it with either nara, pala, sena. So this is our new verse for this week. So the way these chapters work is they basically give you a verse in the Gita, and then to understand the verse, we need to go through the chapter. So the way I'll do this is I'll give you a general outline of the verse, and hopefully you have some questions, and those questions will be answered in the chapter. Okay. So I'll chant it. Traigunya Vishaya Vedaha Nistraigunyo Bhavarjuna Nirdvandvo Nitya Sattvastaha Niryogakshema Atmavan. Here's the interpretation. The Vedas' concern is with the three gunas. Be without the three gunas, O Arjuna. This is an imperative. Put an exclamation mark there. Freed from duality. Ever firm in purity, independent of possessions, possessed of the self. Possessed of the self. Atma Van. So what I've done was take a note of this first. Traigunya Vishaya Veda. The topic of the Vedas is the Trigunas. Now here's the problem. Where does it say of the Vedas? It doesn't say Vedasya. So what I've done was, if you were to convert this into a proper sentence, according to what we know, it would be like this. Vedana Vishaya. In other words, Vishaya means the topic, the sphere of concern. So the topic of the Vedas is the three gunas. Also, I want you to notice this. Instead of three, it says trai. This is what Rani was mentioning. You're going to say, how do you go from three into trai? We will see that. Okay. Next one is Nistraigunyo Bhavarjuna. If you were to interpret that, it will be, hey, Arjuna, Nistraigunyaha bhava. In other words, oh Arjuna, be, this is an imperative that we're going to learn about, be nistraigunyaha, more like nistraigunyaha, be without the three gunas. Okay, so all I've done was I've just changed the, I've added this word here. It's not there originally. I've just added this word here, but I'm just rearranging it to see how you go from the original into the proper that makes sense. Next one is nirdvandvo, in other words, without opposites. Nir, without, dvandva, opposites, without opposites. Nitya sattvastaha. Nitya, eternally permanent. Nitya sattva is purity. Staha, this is upapada compound. In other words, firmly established in purity. That's literally the translation. However, here's what I've done. I've added two words, cha and bhava. Nirdvandvaha cha nitya sattva staha bhava. Be, in other words, bhava means be, like be right now. Be without opposites. Be nirdvandvaha cha and firm in permanent purity. Nitya sattva staha. The reason I'm adding these words, be and an, is because without them, the sentence is not going to make so much sense. So there is a level of intelligence that you have to use on your own in order to get to the bottom of these verses, because the translation directly is not going to make sense if you don't fill it, if you don't add in the fillers. Next one, nir yoga kshema. In other words, without acquisition and maintenance. Kshemaha means prosperity or to maintain. Without acquisition and maintenance, and possessed of the self. Nir yoga kshemaha cha atmavan bhava. Be without acquisition and maintenance and possessed of the self. Introduction to meter. Don't worry, we will understand the whole verse. If you didn't understand anything I just said, that's super, because the whole chapter is going to help us explain. Introduction to meter. So what it's saying here is that the every verse is called shloka, a meter or a chandaha. Shloka. So the whole thing is called a shloka or a meter. This shloka is divided into lines. Each line is called a pada, 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 pada. The syllables, each pada is divided into syllables. The syllable is called akshara. So we have shloka, pada, akshara. And every pada has a certain amount of syllables. If it's got 8 syllables, that's called the anushtub. The anushtub shloka, the anushtub meter. Okay, and then here we can see the different kind of meters that we have. You got the Gayatri Chandaha. This is whereby each, there's 3 lines, and each line has 8 syllables, 8, 8, 8. We got the Anushtub, the very common one in the Gita. So every line has 8 syllables, 8, 8, 8. So believe it or not, if you count, if we go back into here, if you divide this into syllables, you find 8 syllables in every single line. That's why there's a consistency for every single verse. And that's why we cannot chant the verse any other way than Traigunya Vishaya Vedaha Nistraigunyo Bhavarjuna. That is because of the 8, 8, 8, 8 syllables in every single pada line. So let's move on to the mat and vat. As I just said, possessing that. We will now study the declensions for masculine nominals ending in mat or vat. Or mant and vant according to some dictionaries. However, I want you to stick with mat and vat right here, because that is the Panini original selection. Suffixes. Let's go line by line. Matvat, suffix which indicates possessing that thing, as I said. In other words, full of that thing. Atmavan, full of the self, possessing the self, filled with the self, or filled with happiness, possessing happiness, full of happiness. Here it is, truth. Possessing truth, full of truth, or filled with truth equals truthful. Therefore, you don't really put in English translation possessed with truth, you put truthful. If you cannot find a word for truthful, then you just stick with possessing truth. In most cases, the final product, the final word, for example, sukhavat will be an adjective. So it's going to qualify some noun. The formula goes like this. For the masculine and the neuter, it's going to be noun stem like sukha plus matvat. And you're going to find this on LRB 2223. There it is. This is the very common paradigm, probably as common as the nara. So 22 for masculine and 23 for neuter. And I'll tell you about feminine. Okay, feminine is noun stem plus vati. Instead of vat, you just add an e there. Okay, so Manish, what did I just say? What is the formula for masculine and neuter?
So with the stem of the word, we will add mat or vat, depending on whatever is needed.
And what about feminine?
And it will be vati, just adding I.
Super. And therefore, it will decline like nadi.
Nadi.
Nadi, LRB 11. Nadi paradigm. Okay, here it is. When to use mat or vat? If the stem ends in a or a, sukha, jnana, then use vat. Simple. Sukha vat, possessed of happiness equals joyful. So what does joyful mean? That which is possessed of, full of joy. Full of, there it is, full of joy. In other words, sukha vat. Or dhana vat. Dhanam is wealth. Dhanavat, possessed of wealth, full of wealth. What do we call that which is full of wealth? Wealthy. Okay, other vowels, consonants use matvat interchangeably. For example, buddhi, which is intelligence or knowledge. See this I? Buddhi, you don't have to use now vat because it is other than the a. Use buddhi mat. So is this buddhi mat? Okay, buddhi mat. So when the stem ends with a or a, use a vat. If the stem ends with anything other than an a or a, use mat or vat interchangeably. You cannot go wrong. So buddhi mat, full of intelligence, wise. Now, how do you decline this, right? Because buddhi mat is a stem. Therefore, we go back to LRB. See how it says stem ends with a vat. So buddhi mat. So if you want to decline it, like nominative, it's buddhi man. Buddhi man. So how do you say wise Rama?
Buddhi van Rama.
Or buddhi man.
Yeah.
Buddhi man Ramaha. These orange ones are the feminines. Bhagavati Sena.
Sukhavan Naraha.
Which means what?
One joyful man.
How do we say for the joyful man?
Sukhavate Naraya.
Excellent. How do we say from the joyful man?
Sukhavataha
Narat.
Narat.
How do we say of the joyful man? Sangha?
Sukhavataha narasya.
Excellent. And how do we say at or on the joyful man or in the joyful man? Sophie?
Sukhavati Nari.
Sita is full of happiness. In other words, Sita is joyful. Sita asti. Okay? Sita is Sukhavati. I just explained that. Sukhavati. Repeat that, Manish.
Sita Sukhvati Asti. Sita is full of happiness.
Or Sita is
Joyful.
good. In other words, if you did not know how to convert this full of happiness, just stay with full of happiness. Can't go wrong there. The house was possessed of knowledge. Graham, jnana, knowledge. Vat, asit. Because jnana, vat is the neuter. If we go back here, I'm going to go back on neuter. There it is. Next page, 23. The nominative is vat. Therefore, graham, because that's a neuter, and then you qualify the neuter with a neuter. So bhagavat graham, blessed house.
Andre, I didn't understand. Why did you use the Bhagavan earlier?
Bhagavan was a masculine, Melanie. Remember, every paradigm has masculine, neuter, and feminine. So Bhagavan Naraha, because Naraha is the man, and man is the noun. I need to qualify the masculine with a masculine paradigm. Therefore, Bhagavan Naraha. If I want to
So the mat and the vat becomes man and van for the masculine.
Say again.
I must have got it wrong.
Sorry, say again.
So to say possessed of, we use nouns ending in mat and vat.
Correct.
So if it's a masculine noun, you turn it into a man, do you, or a van?
Exactly.
Van.
If you're going to a nominative, yeah, the stem is vat, right? The stem has a slight difference, but the nominative is van.
Okay.
You know,
Right.
just like
Right.
nara.
Right.
Nara is a stem. It's different than naraha, right? So naraha is obviously already different than the.
Yeah. Right. So I understand now. Yeah.
Cool. Tat graham jnana vat asit. That house was, because asit is a past tense, was possessed of knowledge. Possessed. Now notice I'm not saying here genitive, right? This is not this of. Don't confuse that with genitive. It just means possessed of happiness, possessed of joy, etc. It's not genitive. So think of it this way. It saves you from having to use a genitive case, this whole possessed thing. Shiva is possessed of intelligence. So Shiva bhavati, Shiva asti. So you just know it. You look up the word intelligence in a dictionary, whatever that word means. Could be panditaha, could be buddhi man. Shiva is possessed of intelligence. In other words, Shiva is smart. Shiva is wise. Ravana is filled with anger. Ravanaha, krodha, which is anger, van. Same concept, full of anger. Krodha van. Repeat after me, Smriti. Read this out loud.
Ravanaha krodhavan asti.
Good. So, which means what?
Ravana is filled with anger.
Or?
He's resentful, vengeful.
Or possessed.
Possessed, yeah, he's possessed with anger. Yeah.
What else do we have here? Put full of anger, filled with anger, possessing anger. Yeah. Just stick with possessing, you'll get the idea.
Sorry, Andre, before we go forward, the Shiva is possessed of intelligence.
Yeah.
So if we would have written Shiva buddhi mat asti, that will be wrong.
Yeah, because mat, because that's neuter, that's qualifying, but Shiva is a masculine. If you want to say house is full of intelligence, or house, but okay, whatever. House, graham, then you would say graham buddhi mat asti.
Because of the nominative.
Yeah, exactly. So if you go back to, I'm going to go neuter. Here it is, nominative.
Buddhi vat.
Buddhi mat or buddhi vat. Baby is full of love. Okay, that which is full of love is called affectionate or tender. This is just a joke. Maha alpa purusha, mega small person. Okay, very small person. Maha, that was just a made up word. Maha alpa purusha, sneha, which is love. Van, in other words, full of love. We worship the one possessing fortune. We worship the possessor of fortune. Vayam, we, Bhagavan namamaha. Namamaha means to worship or to bow or to prostrate. Now you know what the word Bhagavan comes from. Bhagavat means fortunate or blessed. Fortunate, glorious, or blessed. Convert that into a nominative, Bhagavan. That means the fortunate one, the glorious one, the blessed one. So whenever we say the word Bhagavan, all you're really saying is LRB 22 nominative. Glorious sage is wise. Bhagavan rishihi. Buddhiman asti. Glorious army is wise. Bhagavati sena. Buddhimati asti. Okay. Mati. How do you know it's mati? Mati. Doesn't matter if it's male.
Feminine, isn't it?
Feminine.
So the orange ones are the feminine, by the way. Okay. So that was matvat. Next one. Yeah. Same concept. Instead of possessing, ya means relating or belonging to. In other words, deriving from. But in most cases, it's going to be relating or belonging to. Formula. Noun stem plus ya declines like nara palasena. Okay, so vat does not decline like nara palasena. It declines like LRB 22, 23. But ya does decline like nara palasena. So it's much easier. Satya. Ooh, satyam. How many times you've heard that? Satyam. In other words, sat, existence. What is that which relates to existence? Truth. Ya relating to sat, ya. Existence relating to existence is satya, truth. Okay, often ends up being neuter noun. Can also be used as an adjective. That's why you see usually satyam. You don't see satyaha. You don't see satya. You always see satyam. Okay, rule. If there is a vowel end of a stem, remove it before adding a ya. Danta. See this red ones? That's a vowel. So get rid of it. Dant, ya. Just add a ya there. Dantya. There it is. Dantya. What do? We got rid of the a.
On the dantia, Andre.
Huh?
The dantia is for tooth, one tooth. Many teeth, like teeth. How do you say?
Or you say dantyaha, dantyani,
Dantyani.
right? So in other words, you decline it like a nara, pala, or sena. Okay, so relating to tooth, what is that that relates to tooth? Dental. Okay, vira, get rid of the a, virya. What is that relates to a hero? Heroism. Rajan, get rid of the this one. Then you're gonna probably ask, why? What about this? You cannot have two vowels together. Therefore, there's a little exception. So you get rid of the an altogether. Therefore, Rajya. What is that relates to a king? Kingdom. Rama lives in kingdom.
Rama Raje Vasati.
This is another rule. First vowel in stem strengthens to vridhi grade. You got a stem. Whatever the first vowel is, a, I, u, r, l, that vowel will strengthen into vridhi grade. Vridhi grade I said on LRB. For example, shura, which is hero, and for viraha, shuraha, shura, shaurya. How do you go from u into au? You strengthen it into vridhi grade. Okay, there it is. Shu, shurya into shaurya, vridhi grade. Triguna, trigunas, traigunya. That's what Trani was describing. 3 into traigunya. So relating to the trigunas, pandita, again, strengthen the a, panditya, relating to the wise man, which is skillfulness or cleverness. Same concept. So look at these pink ones and look at all we're doing is the pink and the blue. Panditya, traigunya, shaurya. There's two changes taking place. We also see rule 2 in some words. Rule 2 is this one. In some words like putra, pautra. Pay attention, you'll see this before. Putra, pautra, grandson. Rule 2 doesn't apply to some words. Okay, so still on word rule 2 here. It does not apply to, for example, satya, dantya. See how pink remains still the same? It should be satya, dantya. No, it does not apply to some words. That's all it's saying. The final prefix is twa or ta. So twa is for masculine or neuter, and ta is for feminine. This means state of being. That means the state of that word. For example, state of being happy, happiness. State of being a man, manhood. State of being noble, nobility. So, twa or ta just means in English, ness, hood, or iti in short. Okay, so actually twa will be mostly for neuter, and you will rarely decline this like a masculine. For example, you never see satwaha, you see satwam. Here it is, sat plus twa. Notice how I'm just adding the blue ones, satwa, purity. So what is existence? What is a state of existence? Purity. What is a state of nitya, eternal? Well, eternity, nityatwa. If you want to decline it, nityatwam. State of immortal, amrita, amritatwa, immortality. Shirgala, that's a jackal, common animal in the fables. Shirgala twa, state of being a jackal. Twam shirgalam twamasi. There are two kinds of suffixes. What we have learned is the secondary suffix. Mat, wat, ya, twa. Okay?
Sorry, mat and wat means possession.
Mm-hmm.
And twa means state of being.
Mm-hmm. And ya?
And ya means relating to or belonging to.
100% correct. Where is it placed? N of noun stems. Okay? Noun plus any one of these suffixes. and it forms, in most cases, an adjective. Now, primary, this is a very simple one, attaches end of a verb root, vid, to know. Ved, so what do? You strengthen to guna grade, vid, strengthen to good, you get ved, okay? And then you put an a at the end, veda. Yuj, how about yoga? Where does yoga come from? So just tracing back, what's the etymology of these words? How do they come about? Yoga, yuj, strengthen please, yog plus a, yoga, union. You're probably going to ask, how do you go, what happened to this j into g, right? I don't know. Because my teacher also said he doesn't know, so I've got no choice to say it. I also don't know. If I was explaining, I would be able to tell you, but too bad. Drsh, strengthen that into darsh. This is consistent on the LRB. There's no funny rules here. You can see there. Drsh, darsh, darshana. Another word, darshana, we use in a lot. In this case, you used ana instead of a. Why? Because the blue one is the suffix, so you don't have to stick with a. See, a is just a suffix. Suffix, suffix, suffix. Yeah, so look at these primary suffixes as more like, how do you go from Veda? Where did the word Veda? How do you come to the word Veda? How do you come to the word yoga? How do you come to the word darshana? And it tells you. Step 1, strengthen. Step 2, add the prefix, the suffix. Done. See, we don't have to create these words now. This is just general knowledge, how these words have come about. Kshemaha, security, prosperity. Gunaha, quality, attribute, strand. These are the most common ones, quality or attribute. Dvandvam, opposites. Nitya, adjective, eternal. Nityam, eternally. This is, see the siya? Now you recognize. Ah, yeah, now I know how we came to this word. Bhagavat, fortunate or glorious. Yogaha, union or acquisition. So whatever comes together is yoga. Coming together of knowledge, yoga. Coming together of chapters, yoga. That's why every chapter in Bhagavad Gita ends with yoga. Coming together of family is technically yoga. Coming together of your food and your body is yoga also. Kingdom, realm, rajyam. Vishayaha, concern or just topic. Sattvam, purity. True man, they say, satyaha, naraha. True army, satya, sena. True fruit, satyam, palam.